Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. I'm sorry for a huge gap between videos. I was traveling and I had some medical problems. So right now I am unfortunately unable to hear on my left ear, but nuances in a community post and discussion. Today we're going to be talking about the situation in Ukraine and the map update and what I mean by returning optimism, because situation on the front line, when we kind of look at it from the get-go, doesn't look that great, right? But let's get into it. So Russia has been very busy. Russia has been throwing more forces towards Ukrainians. They have been also making certain progress and were able to undermine certain positions. Couple of things that I need to underscore. Firstly, our expectations for a slowdown of Russian activities did not came true. Most notably, this happened because while there was an initial boost of supplies of weapons to Ukraine from when there was a signing of the bill for support for Ukraine, and there was a big packet of help that was sent to Ukraine, a lot of the newer packages just contained essentially the same drip fitting kind of a approach of supplying certain weapons. Ukraine is still having certain issues of ammunition. Most notably right now, one of the biggest things that Ukraine is missing is actually not artillery shells, but the powder parts of the artillery shells. So to fire an artillery shell, you actually have two pieces that you need to employ. One is the shell itself that is filled with explosives, and then there is a powder charge that goes after it, so the powder charge explodes and then the shell flies away. So there is a severe lack of those powder charges right now for Ukraine. But generally speaking, while there is a dedication of supplying stuff to Ukraine, it's not making its way to the front line, unfortunately. For example, one of the interesting things that I noted in the newest package for Ukraine from France is that France will supply a lot of armored personnel carriers, weapons, artillery, and so on. And when you kind of look up to it, it's like, this looks like about the amount that would be needed to equip a brigade. And indeed, the newest articles that have been released, they're talking about France actually training brigade. So I believe that this is the current way of operations of Ukraine. They are getting a lot of these newer weapons that they're getting from allies, and they're trying to equip new brigades, which obviously means that less of that stuff is being supplied directly to the front line. Now, for a person that is not an expert like myself, like a layman, this doesn't seem reasonable, because we would like to see Russia be stopped and not taking the Ukrainian defensive positions. However, when I listen to certain experts, they are not as set in stone. For example, there are three very, very prominent military analysts, Michael Kaufman, Rob Lee, Konrad Muzyka. And these three guys, they constantly go to Ukraine to speak with the soldiers and understand the bigger picture that Ukraine is having and what kind of issues Ukraine is having. And they have actually stated that there is a cautious optimism for what's happening in Ukraine. While they did acknowledge that since their last visit, Russia has improved in their use of drones and surveillance, and most notably, one thing that was happening all across the front line at the start of the war for Russians, where there was some intelligence on the front line, and the chain of command of delivering that information to the top was so long that, for example, when artillery strike was already ordered, there was already nothing present where the artillery strike needed to be executed. This has been shortened right now, and Russians right now are more operational in executing on strikes. Most notably, right now, another big problem, if we look back at the front line and Russian advances, is the use of the aerial bombs. Ukraine still hasn't deployed F-16s. Zelensky just recently has expressed his frustration that F-16s are still not in Ukraine, and Ukraine is not receiving fast enough the supplies for anti-air systems. Just recently, there was a shortage of man-pads on Ukrainian side, for example. This was noted because all across the eastern part of Donetsk, we've seen a lot of videos where close air support aircraft were flying along the front lines, and they were essentially striking Ukrainians right there on the ground, which was like basically, if there was at least one guy with man pads, he would just fire that anti-air missile and that plane would go down. That was for a couple of months, but just recently this week, as I was kind of noting this for my notes, we saw that actually Ukrainians downed one, or actually maybe even two, these close air support aircraft. So some of the anti-air systems are making their ways to the front lines. But coming back to these military analysts, and the first point of optimism is that while the technological race that is happening right between Ukrainians and Russian is ongoing, between the FPVs and so on, it does feel more and more, maybe not for this analyst, but from others, that Ukrainians still have the upper edge on certain Russian deliveries. We see this with Ukrainian drone production being scaled. Some of the latest drone attacks of Ukrainians were massive in scale. They were able almost match the amount of targets that Russia can produce. So it's really, really good. And I believe with further developments in drone technology for Ukraine, they will get more and more ahead of Russians. This is probably needed, obviously, with certain sanctions to prevent supply of critical components to Russia. But generally speaking, the optimism for these analysts lies in the fact that Ukrainians are now building fortifications more than they did before. So now a lot of the positions deeper inside of Ukrainian territory are now fortified. Ukraine has been also strengthening their core ability to resist Russians, so their tactics are more robust. And more importantly, Ukrainians have been training a lot of forces, and this is right now the biggest problem actually on the front line, is that Ukrainian manpower is not yet on the front line. So while the front lines right now don't look that great, the situation compared to even 6 months ago is a lot better, and the prospects are optimistic with Ukrainian troops, newly trained Ukrainian troops, expected to be arriving by the end of summer, mid-autumn. But coming back to the map, where are the main parts and what are the activities that Russia is performing? Well, notably around the Kharkiv area, there has been reports of extreme losses on the Russian side. Pretty much the major parts of that initial grouping that Russia had is now gone. But it has been reported that some special forces has been sent to the area. And I know, right, Russia still has special forces, but apparently they do, at least as reported. And these special forces have been sent to try to counterattack on the Ukrainian advances around Hliboke, where Ukrainians recently tried to undermine Russian positions by attacking both from the south and also kind of encircling the village of Hliboke to trying to kind of do the semi-encirclement move. But on the other hand, there is also additional activity inside of a Vovchansk city. However, the fighting are not getting Russians any major breakthroughs, and that's good to know. The breakthrough that Russia did achieve was in the village of Pishane, and here, while Ukrainians have been deploying certain forces, right now situation has been slowed down, but it's not stabilized yet. This is dangerous because essentially if Russians will continue advancing and capture the village of Kolesnivka, then it's basically going to cut the Ukrainian grouping here on the right bank of the Oskil River in two, which is not favorable for Ukraine. Additionally, there are certain advances of Russians in the Siversk directions that have been noted recently. Moreover, Russia is trying to finally equalize the line around the Chasiv Yar, together with their additional push in Klishivka direction. They have had certain success here. Ukrainians are using the channel to separate themselves from Russians. The big news that people are obviously talking about is Toretsk direction, where we can go in depth at certain point what happened here. Right now, Russians are basically breaking through, and already there are talks that potentially Toretsk, which is being heavily bombarded by the Russian aviation, is going to hold for additional time, but we should expect that potentially Toretsk can fall at certain time. Russia is also advancing in the Avdiivka direction. Most notably, recently they were able to capture important village of Prokhres over here. It's been an important point. It's on the hill. It's the same hill that goes along the Ocheretina axis, if you can see right over there. And this hill is basically a dominant hill in the area, and capturing of Prokhres basically starts allowing Russia to kind of spread beyond the river that was over here, Vovcha River, if you can see, that is going right over here, and that prevented Russians from easily attacking these directions. This is not good news, and unfortunately, Ukrainians are still not able to contain the Russian advances in the area. I already explained why in one side. I will also just add that the second reason why is because Ukraine, despite the fact that the Kharkiv area direction required less Ukrainian forces that Russia hoped for, because Russia right now isn't doing what is militarily most advisable, and this is kind of the red thread to what Russia is doing, because fighting like Russia is fighting is a madman's way of fighting, right? If Ukraine actually has those brigades that everyone is talking about, then they are undermining their situation for a potential big problems in the future for Russians. But they are continuously advancing on the front line. We're going to talk more about what's happening on the front line in other videos. I just want to state that in what I've been telling you all along is that while Russia is advancing, they are doing it at a major cost. And I was always trying to explain that, Russian stocks are running short. There are these experts that are counting it, there are other experts that are counting it, but it was always undermined by certain Western media just parroting numbers of production that are being just said out loud by the Russian propaganda machine. And then it's like me pulling my hair out when I'm trying to explain that the Russian stocks of ammunition and tanks is running low, that the Russian weapons stockpile is large, but it's not infinite. And then people is like, oh, no, Georgie, you're wrong. It's actually, I just read, The Economist, I just read the Wall Street Journal, I just read the Washington Post or whatever else article, and they said that Russian production is through the roof. They're outproducing EU, UK, US, everyone. They are dominant. They are not even close at running low. Thankfully, finally, I don't know what happened. Finally, some stars aligned, and some of the bigger articles, for example, here we have The Economist, but there are also a couple other ones that have started reporting on the fact that Russia is running out of their Soviet era stockpiles, and they're dipping into some of the most deprived pieces of equipment that they have from even before I was born, like 2 times. It's kind of silly, and finally the acknowledgement that Russia actually might, just might, because they're fighting like idiots, run out of whatever they have. And I want to also underline, when I talked about the articles and talked about the Konrad Muzyka, Michael Kaufman, and everyone else, I want to underscore the War on the Rocks podcast. I think it's well worth subscribing to it. It's a paid content. But if you really want to get into details from the experts, and this is something I'm going to be adjusting in the way I'm presenting information, I'm going to be putting more and more reference to the news sources, to the articles, and we're going to go through a lot of them. For example, we're going to take apart different summaries of podcasts. We're going to talk about different articles. For example, the Insider is a very good overview, does on the situation of Frontline, and so on. So I'm going to start introducing you to the actual things you can follow yourself to educate you on where that information comes from, and maybe alter my content, because just the fact that I cannot release content fast enough is problematic. But then we get probably to the biggest news, the absolutely biggest news of the day. Joe Biden quit the race for 2024 presidency, and it's basically been a shockwave. Now, Joe Biden had a little bit of an issue with his campaign. There has been accumulation of messages that really favored the Trump side, that really favored Trump to win in US. And Trump, I will never stop underscoring that Trump is a nightmare for Ukraine. Trump will end Ukraine. It will kill Ukrainians. Ukrainians will be abandoned. We do not want that. So if you care for Ukraine, if Ukraine for you is important, you must vote blue. And thankfully now with Kamala Harris taking over from Biden, and this is not really a big question anymore, because Biden in his post has specifically expressed that he endorses Kamala Harris for president. And moreover, there was a lot of question, is Kamala Harris a good candidate? Is she a suitable substitute for Joe Biden? My biggest perspective, and this is purely my feeling, you're welcome to have your own perspective feeling, please share it in comments, but my feeling was always that there is a lot of people that really do not want Trump. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of fanatics. Even in this community, there are still people that are deluded and are writing me comments under every video saying, no, Georgie, you just don't understand Trump. He is actually really good for Ukraine and so on. It's like, but there is a lot of real big Trump supporters here. And my perspective was always that actually not, that there is a lot more people that do not want to support Trump. The problem was always Joe Biden versus Joe Biden. Joe Biden as a candidate was problematic for a lot of people that really wanted, because people wanted something else. People did not want to have the same kind of, think about this, it's like Joe Biden and Trump, they're like intertwined. So it's like if you vote one, then you must vote another. And it's like both of them are super old, and it's like, man, like I just don't feel it. And I felt that if there is any other candidate, then that other candidate will be just a complete sweep against the other one. And we already see the signs of it, because as Kamala Harris was declared a candidate, in one day, over just one day, she got over 100 million in donation, which is an astronomical number, absolutely astronomical number, just as a start. And all of the discussions about her being a valuable candidate or not, if she should be, was completely swept aside, and it's now becoming clearer and clearer that the Democratic Party will completely fall behind Kamala Harris. Moreover, the Democratic Super PAC has reported that besides the 100 million that Kamala Harris raised, the Democratic Super PAC also raised in a day additional 150 billion. So it's astronomical numbers that are coming in for the Democratic side, absolutely dwarfing the Republican side. I really hope that this will show that and engage and raise the enthusiasm for the Democratic side and for people that are on the Republican side, but just feel that Republicans and Trump is not the same, that Republicans and Trump is not representing what Republican side is, and they will be okay. At least this is a somewhat of a fresh candidate from new generation. And most importantly, because Ukraine is an important issue, we already know that Jake Sullivan, with a new appointee by Kamala Harris, will get out. And the person that's coming in to substitute Jake Sullivan in a Kamala Harris team is a huge, huge hawk against the Russians. He has been criticizing to no end that there has never been done enough to support Ukraine. So good on that. A lot of optimistic messages. I'm really happy to say that finally I'm making videos. I will talk to you more, guys. I love you all. Slava Ukraini, and I'll see you next time.